we've been talking in so many different ways about the extraordinary duality of life. I mean, we have lots of different ways of phrasing it, but that's what we're always talking about. That there's a part of us that knows that we were made for an unconditioned state of bliss, and yet every day there's always an up and down and an up and down and an up and down, and it's the mind-breaking conflict between what we know we're called to and yet what we still experience despite the fact that we know we were called to something else. There's a very interesting reality that I've contemplated, that if we felt we were made for suffering and for loneliness and for unhappiness, we wouldn't rebel against it, because we would just know that that was just our natural state. Swami Kriyananda talked once about a dynamic, very dynamic dream that he had once. And in the dream was about how the mind is the torturer, so the whole purpose of the dream isn't important. But in the dream, he was in the top story of a building, and it was a torture chamber. And everybody there was tortured. And they'd wake up every morning, and the torturers would come and torture them, and then the day would be over, and they'd all go to sleep for the night. Then they'd get up the next morning and were tortured, and it wasn't like it was much fun, but it was just the way things were. So everybody just accepted it. And that was what made me start thinking that in our human life, we're often not receiving what we longed to receive, but we rebel against it. We don't just accept it, because we're two parts. There's the part of us that has not forgotten our divine nature, and then there's the part of us that is identified with this limitation. And as long as we live in the part that's identified with limitation, what do we experience? Limitation. But even as we're experiencing it, we have this really strong feeling that there's something wrong. There's something just deeply and profoundly wrong. And that's why we incarnate over and over again. Yogananda said something absolutely delightful. He said, the reason we incarnate over and over again is not because life is a total catastrophe, just the opposite. It almost works. And because it almost works, we decide that if I could just adjust a few things, like I was meant to be an artist, but I followed my father into the banking business. I really should have married, Robert, but instead I married his brother Gregory. If I'd only had children, or if I had only not had children, whatever it might be, it's almost work. So we just think we'll just shift it around a little bit, and so then we try again. And of course we miss it by a little, so we try it again, then we try it again, then we try it again. Until one of the phrases in Autobiography of a Yogi that we absolutely love is the phrase anguishing monotony. That after a while, this constant trying and failing to find perfect happiness in an ever-changing world of duality assumes a certain anguishing monotony. And it's that monotony. I mean, it's an interesting wordsmith. As a writer, I think about these things. Monotony doesn't really pair with anguishing, because monotony is not very interesting, but nonetheless, there it is. And when that begins to happen, the way the divine works is when we really want a different answer, we start getting a different answer. It's like we attracted, of course, these are the things we've been talking about. So when you come to the subject which we're talking about tonight, how to love and be loved, it's always been a mystery to me. In the course of my years, I've had the privilege of receiving the confidences of a great many people. The people who hope that to gain clarity on their life situation. So I know a lot about a lot of people. And everybody brings the same story. Everybody wants to be loved. Everybody wants to be seen. Not everyone is looking for marriage and family life, but everyone wants to be loved. One of the extraordinary qualities of human life can only be called an existential state of loneliness, which is we feel solitary within ourselves. And even though that at times we rejoice at that solitude, also there's another part of us that chafes against that solitude. I don't mean aloneness in a physical sense, but a different kind of solitude. I'll tell you something Swami Kriyananda said that I've contemplated a great deal and I don't quite know what to do with it. He said, just as you come into a state of final realization of oneness with God, he said, there is a moment where you realize that there is only one reality. See, now we're always looking at each other and thinking, you could give me, I could give to you. We're solitary in ourselves, but we're not solitary on the planet. So we're always looking out and thinking that something's going to come to us like this. But as we get farther and farther out of duality and closer to that absolute oneness from which it all emanates, he said, you step into that oneness, he said, for just a moment, you feel absolutely lonely. Because you really are, that there's no other reality but the one. And then he said, but that only lasts for a split second, because then you're flooded with bliss. Because in that oneness we finally understand that we are and always have been complete. And this is how the saints and masters all tell us that even though from this side we think it's a crummy system, from that side you see that it's not. It's always been perfect. Nothing's ever been done to us. But the confusion for me is, inasmuch as we all long for the same things, you would think we would be able to take care of each other more than we do. You know? And I still don't understand, but we don't. We find so many ways not to take care of each other. So you ask why. So I've been trying to think about it from every angle that I can. And I do know also from meeting and talking profoundly with many people that all unhappiness springs from inside ourselves. And years of counseling couples, trying to help them come together in harmony. I very rarely have met a couple that the problem was actually between them. The problem is always within us as individuals. We have some dissonance within us, and we're hoping really that some other person will cure that dissonance for us. And we're helpless in that dissonance. So the real secret of both giving and receiving love is a sense of self-worth that is based on the unshakable ground of knowing that we are children of God and that we are loved by God. There's a French saint, Saint Jean Vianney is his name, and he, among others, said the simple statement, if you knew how much God loved you, you would die for joy. And just run that through your mind a little bit. I mean, do we know how much we are loved? And we're not loved just like with sincere intention. We are loved by the power of love itself. What is love? It is the very fabric of the universe. It's joy in action. It's bliss in action, is how Swami has described it. When you feel so much joy, what happens? That joy just spills over. Everywhere you look, you see that joy, and you pass that joy on. But what keeps us from doing it is that we're afraid. We're afraid of opening ourselves. We're being afraid of being misunderstood. We're afraid of being betrayed. There it is. And in the Bible, St. John says, perfect love casts out all fear. Because it becomes self-forgetful. I used to think, and I've been doing this for a while, thinking, yes, but I actually mean trying to be a devotee. One of my very early counselor friends, she is my soul sister. She's in the astral world, but my first 10 years on the spiritual path, we were always together. And every so often she would look at me and she would say, Asha, you're doing it again. What? Thinking, stop. She would say like that. And it wasn't, of course, that my intelligence should be shut off, but my worry around and around and around and around. So I used to think that as you progress on the spiritual path, you actually get your act together. You get it perfect. You behave in this way, you think in that way, you never miss your practices, you pronounce all the syllables correctly, you just get it perfect. But I have a theory, and this is, most of what I tell you is what Swami Kriyananda taught me. But every so often I offer what I will call the gospel according to Asha, which you should take with a big spoonful of salt, okay? But this is my personal theory about this, is that we actually never really get any better. We're just as confused and disorderly as we've ever been. We just stop caring. Because self-realization is not the perfection of what I call myself. It's complete forgetting about myself. What is it? Why do we enjoy love so much? Because we forget about ourselves. When I was younger, before I met Swami, before I found the Vedanta teachings, I just didn't know what I was going to do with myself. It's just nothing in this world interests me. I was so confused. I remember telling my father when I was about 16, I don't know what I'm going to do, Dad, but I'm never entering the world that you're in. It just was, many of you know this, it just didn't look like anything to me. But the only thing I could think of I would do is that I would be a mother. I would raise children. Of course, I needed a necessary husband, especially in those days. I was the last generation that thought you had to have a husband to take care of you. I know other women have taken a different approach, but that was my generation. But I was going to have many, many children because I thought it seemed to me like honest work. That was basically how it felt to me. It was honest work. And very interestingly, almost immediately, when I met Swami Kriyananda, I lost all desire to have children. It was the defining quality of my life. I met him, and it just disappeared. And the reason it disappeared was this. What I felt when I was younger was I felt so confined. I felt so limited. And so I had this idea, if I multiplied my body, use my body to create other bodies, then that I would get bigger. And then this realization came to me that merely giving birth to a child has no effect on your faults. It's just still there. And that multiplication in a physical world would not break the confinement I felt. And you can call that confinement ego. The divine self identified with the limited self. But what it really was, hold on, was just self-concern. I'm worried about me. In fact, Swami Kriyananda taught us he would make fun of attitudes. He would make humor out of attitudes we might be inclined to have seriously. So when you weren't caught in the delusion, we would make jokes about it, so that when you were caught in the delusion, a little piece of you would remember. So one of those that I've come to on this is that whenever things go wrong, I plaintively say, and my travel companion Dambar is used to hearing me say this, nobody cares about me but me. And I often realize that I'm falling into the mood of nobody cares about me but me. And of course, as long as we're thinking about that, as long as we're feeling, what about me? What about what's happening to me? How do I feel? What do I want? Now bear in mind, a certain egoic respect for yourself is necessary. So I'm assuming that. But what we want is we just want to be in the flow of self-forgetfulness. That's where our joy comes from. That's why we like artistic expression. That's why we like creative work. What happens? We forget about ourselves because we love. It's not just people we love. It's we get into that flow, that river of energy that is just moving and giving. And that's what it means in the Bible when it says it's more blessed to give than to receive, which sounds really, to a lot of people like that, is not a very sensible statement. But what it means, it's more blessed to give. It's more blissful to give, is what it means, because we forget ourselves. So the reason we can't forget ourselves is because we need affirmation from the outside, confirmation from the outside. I am a good person because I have all these children that I've raised. I have these people who love me. I have whatever it is that I can point to. But that's an ever insecure ground to be on. Swami Kriyananda wrote many books, and he was also an avid reader. He would read for relaxation. And for a while in our community, people in our community ran a huge used bookstore, when used bookstores used to be viable businesses. And Swamiji would love to go in there, and he would pull out a stack of books to take with him. He said it was enjoyable, but it was also very depressing, because you'd go in and you'd see all these authors' works just sort of, warehoused in this bookstore, and there he was avidly publishing books, hoping that people would read them, and there they would just be lined up, and authors who were famous one day and absolutely forgotten the next. There's nothing in this world that we can hold on to. And as long as we're afraid that we're not worthy, then we're always going to be caught. And we'll be able to go a certain distance, and then that fear will close our heart. So the first step for learning how to give and receive love is to see ourselves as Divine Mother sees us. Just as simple as that. Like, we are loved by our mother. And we have all these deities that are in female form. We worship, we adore, many adore Mother Mary, Jesus' mother. I've contemplated the fact that Mother Mary is one of the most active spiritual figures in creation. She's always somewhere visiting somebody. All over the country, she's always appearing. How many saints appear as regularly and as steadily as Mother Mary does? She's perfect. She's a perfect example. Mother's always busy, isn't she? A mother always knows the children that need her. She has appeared, let's see, I think it was Rwanda. Yes, it was Rwanda. And when Mother would come there, she was coming to visit some schoolgirls. And she would always stay much longer. They would have hours-long visit. And the people would ask afterwards, the visionaries, like, what did you talk about? And apparently, you see, in that culture, if you visit your mother, you have to stay for hours. It's considered very rude if you just drop in and leave. So when they would visit with Mother Mary, they would spend hours with her. And they would tell her everything. And so I did this in school, and then I had this in class. Can you believe that? Just think about that. I mean, it's so poignant. And I don't know if there's anyone in this room who's a visionary of Mother Mary, but we all are. Yogananda has this beautiful phrase, his promise, unknown, I will walk by your side, guarding you with invisible arms. Unknown, I will walk by your side, guarding you with invisible arms. This is God's promise to us. If we are living in the awareness of Divine Mother's love for us, knowing that nothing we do could ever separate us from her, how would you live? How free would you be? How open-hearted would you be? It's a very interesting question to ask yourself. Why do I hold back? And the other side of it is, Well, I'll tell you just an experience that was very vivid to me. I was in taking a period of seclusion, maybe a couple of weeks. I always have to stay more than a few days because it takes about 4 days for me to persuade Asha just to go away. If I take a short seclusion, she hangs around too long. But I can make her go away after I have enough time, and then I can really begin to enjoy my solitude. You understand what I mean? I'm sort of joking. And so oftentimes in meditation, one concentrates on offering oneself into the light, offering yourself at the Guru's feet, offering yourself as an instrument of whatever it is that you're trying to serve, however you feel that. And so I thought, oh, this would be fun, maybe. I'll just let Divine Mother love me. Because to give, to receive, it's all the same. We're just stepping into the river. So I was very centered because I'd been in seclusion for a while. So I was trying to let Divine Mother love me. It was very, very interesting. I was very aware, and when I say Divine Mother, I don't mean a form. I spoke of it in this room to some of you. Jesus spoke of the feminine aspect of God, but in the context of his mission, he had to be secret about it. He called the feminine aspect of God the Comforter. I will send you the Comforter, he said. If you were going to think of the perfect word for a mother, wouldn't that be the word you would use? The mother is the comforter. So Jesus was telling us the same. So I'm trying to feel the mother's love, my mother's love, like that. And I could feel her flooding me with divine vibrations. And they came to about here. It was almost physical. And then what they met was all the self-concern of my heart. I'm still angry at so-and-so, and they mistreated me, and I'm a little sad about this, and I still want that. It wasn't, some of it was specific, but mostly it was just my heart was whirling around the single thought, but what about me? But what about me? But not me in the divine sense, but me in all the ways that I protect myself by keeping myself small. And then I remembered, again, St. John in the Bible, to all who received him, to them gave he the power to become the sons of God. This was John explaining Jesus. And you would think, for heaven's sakes, if I was there, I would receive him. Or now, I would receive him. Why would I not? Oh, but insofar as I'm holding on to all these self-concerned thoughts, there's just not room, or even more clearly, the vibration of self-concern is like this, and it meets the vibration of divine love, and they can't mesh like that. So it's all about self-forgetfulness. Just self-forgetfulness in the contemplation of the beloved. And what allows us to do that is feeling secure. Why do we think about ourselves? I can certainly speak for myself. Because I'm insecure. I'm not good enough. I'm not quite doing this. I have too many responsibilities. I'm dropping the ball over here. Instead of just being like, little children, they just rush to the mother. Oh, here's a lovely story. I had the opportunity to visit the home of Paramahansa Yogananda, 4 Garpar Road in Calcutta. First time I went was 1987, 86 actually. And some of his relatives were still living. Some of the relatives who had met him were still there. Hari Krishna Ghosh, who was Paramahansa Yogananda's nephew, the son of his brother Sananda. And Hari Krishna had a sister, and her name was Shefli. Hari Krishna was 15 years old when Yogananda spent 1 year back in India. The rest of his life was in the U.S. And so during that year, Hari Krishna got to be with him. Shefli was 3 years old. Shefli has no conscious memory of this, but this is the story that everyone tells about her and that she tells. She was 3 years old, a little tiny Indian child. She was still very delicate, so she must have been really small when she was 3. As soon as she saw Yogananda when he came into the room the first time, she rushed to him, she wrapped her arms around his leg, and she would absolutely refuse to be separated him whenever he was in the house. She would crawl on his lap, she would lean up against his side. When he would try to leave her, she would not let him leave her. One evening they tell this story that they were going to the movie theater for some reason. It's sort of hard to put all this together, but anyway, they were. She was too small to be allowed in the theater, but she created such a tantrum that the guru picked her up, put her on his chest, buttoned his coat around her, and took her into the theater. And then she spent the whole time while they're all watching the movie, with her head on the master's heart. And so my first thought was, what a waste, to have had just this one contact with the guru. She considered herself a disciple, and having been too small to remember. And then I thought, what a gift to have been so free that it never crossed her mind. You know what never crossed her mind? It never crossed her mind that Yogananda wasn't as glad to see her as she was to see him. And she was absolutely certain that he wanted to be in her company. Think about that. Suffer little children to come unto me, for such is the kingdom of heaven. And he's not talking about the foolishness or the lack of intellectual comprehension. He's talking about the fearlessness of the heart. And we can love God that way, but also we can be loved that way. And if we are filled with love from the Divine Mother, from the Master, however it comes to you, don't be particular, just take it. And if we walk around in that, we are not empty vessels hoping to be filled by the respect and the affection of other people. We are overflowing fountains that just can't wait, to share. And we can practice. We can just practice all the time. I used to work many years ago. I used to work in retail. Meaning I was a clerk in a retail store, in a department store. And if one person, just one person, came into the store and actually saw me, really looked into my eyes, and without words weren't necessary. We could be talking about the towels and the sheets that I was selling, but really was there with me. It would change my whole day. And then I would be able to give that to others. We have no idea what our effect is. And there's marvelous stories, these death and return stories. You just had Dr. Alexander here talking about that. One of the things that those people all say, no encounter is ever unimportant, because every interaction is an opportunity to love. One of the fantastic stories I read, this man, Dr. Ritchie is his name, and he died at 21 of the flu, and then of course he came back, and he'd been kind of a stinker his whole life. Just selfish and unconcerned about anybody in all kinds of ways. He dies, and he was a Southern Baptist, and so he went to see, as he called him, the Savior, Jesus. And Jesus just looked at him in this after-death state and said, "How much have you loved?" And he said, "I'm just a young man. I just died of the flu. I haven't had any chance." And Jesus said, "How much have you loved?" And he said he was standing in a room, and his whole life was being like a movie, was being like all around him, and it was perfectly evident to Jesus and to him that he hadn't loved very much, like this. But that was the only question. Because you see, when you come out of the duality and come back into the one, that's all there is. So that's the only thing that really lasts. How much have you loved? And just to finish about Dr. Ritchie, everything on the wall was embarrassing to him. And he's standing there with Jesus, and he's looking at his life, and it's an embarrassment. The only thing he could think of that was anything good was he'd become an Eagle Scout. And he said, I love the humanity of this. He said he kind of stretched out both his arms, hoping to block Jesus' view of some of the worst parts. And he reaches over and points to the Eagle Scout incident, which is being broadcast on the walls somehow. And he said his motive was completely transparent to Jesus, completely. And then he says in his southern accent, the Savior was amused, is what he said. The Savior thought it was funny, first of all, that he imagined he could hide, that he wasn't known by Christ, that he wasn't known by the Christ consciousness, by Divine Mother. Savior was amused, at which point Dr. Ritchie just, what did he do? What's that wonderful word? He surrendered. Because we're always in the presence of the Comforter. Allow yourself to be comforted, and everything else will follow.